I just can't.
Hello. We are now recording this session. I'm going to share our screen. All right. I'm going to move everybody over here. Let me make sure I've got you all on mute, again, because you don't want to be doing a solo interpretation for the group. Now, if this were a perfect world, we would all be looking at a test that's written in our language pair. We have instead a test that's all in English. All right, we will still pretend it's a certification simulation exam. Your job is to take this test as seriously as you would if this were exam day. Please fight through each of the exercises. If you come across something you don't know how to say in your other language, do your best with it. If you fall behind, stop and jump back in. Do everything that you would do if you had just paid $300 or whatever it is to pass this certification exam. All right? Just do your best with it. Take a second to grab some scratch paper if you haven't already. You'll want to take notes for the consecutive section. And let's move on to sight translation. All right. What you are about to see is an English to your other working language sight translation. This is a timed exercise. You have 6 minutes to translate the document you are going to see in a moment. Be sure to translate everything on the page, excluding only these instructions. You may use up to 2 minutes to read the document over before you begin your rendition. You may not take notes on the exam copy, but you may do so on scratch paper. Take a moment to get comfortable and to take a sip of water if you choose. The time will begin as soon as you begin reviewing the document. And I should mention now that I will let you know when 2 minutes are up. You have to begin your sight translation after 2 minutes. So read the document over once, begin your sight translation. Just know we will sit here for a full 6 minutes to allow for everyone to have time to review the sight translation document and render their sight translation. Again, you're seeing English, so you're putting this into the other language that you're seeking certification in. Let me make my screen as large as possible so we can fit all the words on it. All right, and please begin your review now.
Just one page, right?
Yes. 2 minutes have passed. If you have not already begun your sight translation, please do so now.
그녀가 말하기를 그녀는 그 아들이 도착했을 때 그리고
David, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. That is the end of your 6 minutes. Please stop sight translating if you haven't already finished. We're going to move on to sight translation number 2. In your actual exam, this sight translation would be written in your other language. You would be putting it into English. Since this is language neutral, we will put another English exercise into your other working language. This is a timed exercise. You have 6 minutes to translate aloud the document below. Be sure to translate everything on the page, excluding only these instructions. You may use up to 2 minutes to read over the document before you begin your rendition. You may not take notes on the exam copy, but you may do so on scratch paper. Take a moment to get comfortable and to take a sip of water if you choose. The timer will begin as soon as you begin reviewing the document. All right, here is site translation number 2. Two minutes have passed. If you have not begun your site translation, please do so now. That is the end of the sight translation portion of this exam. We are now going to move on to the consecutive portion of the exam. You should no longer see anything on your screen. We've arrived at the consecutive portion of the exam in which you will hear a question and answer session between an attorney and a witness. Everything will be in English. You will put the entire exchange into your other language. Please take notes. Some of these portions of dialogue reach probably about 45 words in length. We have 22 minutes to complete this exercise. It may take us a little bit less. We will quit at 22 minutes. On the actual exam, you have 2 repetitions that you may take as an individual. In this simulated environment as a group, we will take 2 repetitions. Remember, these repetitions count against the 22 minutes we as a group have to finish this exercise. So only use them as a last resort. If you need a repetition, turn on your microphone and say, our interpreter requests a repetition. I'll reread the portion we just heard, and that will count as 1 repetition for the entire group. If you never need a repetition, excellent. All right. Okay.
Question.
Yes.
When you do the repetition, then everybody hears this repetition at the same time?
Yes.
So we all have to stop and repeat, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I guess I got it, but
right. So, for example, let's imagine I read something that's 45 words long. I just keep going and going and going and going. And your notes, you run out. You know you're not going to get all of the information. You can say, interpreter requests a repetition, and I'll repeat it for the entire group. Even if you don't need that repetition, I would suggest filling in your notes and reinterpreting that portion. You don't lose anything. And then we'll carry on. And if someone needs another repetition later on in the exercise, then they can say interpreter requests a repetition, and we'll do the same thing. We'll just work very hard to finish everything within 22 minutes. Because if we don't, we would have to count all the scoring units from the point we stop till the end of the exercise as incorrect. So there's some strategy involved in this one. All right. I'll do my best just by watching you guys. If you raise hands or anything, I'll do my best to gauge our pace. And again, this is, a simulation. This is just an approximation of what it would be like. All right. Make sure your microphones are muted. You have pen and paper if you'll be taking notes.
So we raise the hand when we want repetition, or we raise the hand when we're done, or what?
On the long portions, you can raise your hand when you're done, just to wave and let me know you're done. When you want a repetition,
Then you unmute.
You'll unmute and say, interpreter
Okay,
requests a repetition. Thank you. All right. I'm going to double check. All right, we are all muted. Let's begin the consecutive. Mr. Gomez, I am attorney Andrea James. Thanks for appearing today. Happy to. For the record, Mr. Gomez, now that you've been sworn in as a witness, please step up to the stand. Careful, there are some wires there. Okay, thank you. Mr. Gomez, before we begin, let me remind you to speak up so that everyone can hear you. Now, am I correct in my understanding that you are a U.S. citizen, but that you grew up in Central America? Yes, that's right. And do you currently reside in the U.S.? Yes, well, I have an apartment here in Chicago, and I have houses in Mexico, Belize, and Panama. I don't always live here, but when I am in town, I stay around 4 or 5 months in a row. And were you here in Chicago in that capacity around the latter part of August, early part of September of last year? Yes. And at that time, were you the owner of a Rolex watch? Yes, I was. Could you describe that watch to the jury, sir? Yes. It was a Rolex brand watch. It was 18 karat yellow gold, just gorgeous. It was worth about $7,000, an arm and a leg, if you know what I mean. I bought it 3 or 4 years ago, but I was planning on selling it. Now, please listen very closely to the question that I am about to ask you and only answer that question. All right. What steps did you take to sell that watch, sir? Um, I asked my assistant to put an advert in the local paper. If I'm not mistaken, she did that at the end of August. Gosh, maybe she did it at the beginning of September. I'm not sure. No worries. And did you receive any messages from anyone claiming to be a business person interested in purchasing the watch? The thing is, I got calls from tons of people. I think you're referring to the message from Mr. Jackson Homer. He called me on a Sunday and told me he was interested in the watch. He told me he had an insurance company and he'd been looking for a watch like that for months. Was that all he said in his message? No, he also said he'd be back in Chicago in a few days and that he'd like to meet up with me to take a look at the watch. He said he'd call me later to schedule everything. And when you received this call from the individual identifying himself as Jackson Homer, did you have any reservations at all about meeting with him to show him the watch? Yes, I did have reservations. An acquaintance of mine had recently told me about how he'd lost a valuable necklace because some bastard who supposedly owned an insurance company had taken it from him. That's why I was on alert.
Can you repeat it, please?
Yes. Yes, I did have reservations. An acquaintance of mine had recently told me about how he'd lost a valuable necklace because some bastard who supposedly owned an insurance company had taken it from him. That's why I was on alert. Now, because of the information that you had, what steps did you take then, sir? Well, first I contacted the police and a few jeweler friends I have, and I found out that someone named Jackson Homer did steal my friend's necklace. Obviously, that worried me quite a bit. Now, did this person who claimed to be Jackson Homer, insurance company owner, ever contact you again? Yes, he called me twice the next day. The first time he called me around 6:30 p.m. I hadn't gotten back from work yet. He called again at 9:30 and I did answer. And what was the topic of that conversation? Well, he wanted to see the watch and he wanted to buy it. He asked how he could pay, and I told him to bring a cashier's check or cash and that we'd meet up at a jewelry store near my apartment. And did the caller agree upon those terms? No, he preferred to meet up at his office. I agreed to go there. Did you, in fact, go, taking the watch with you to sell it? Yes, I did. Did you meet with someone who claimed to be Jackson Homer? Yes. Do you see that person seated here in the courtroom today? Yes, I do. He's seated beside the defense attorney. He's wearing a gray jacket and a plaid shirt. Please let the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant who is on trial here today for charges of fraud and theft by deception. So, Mr. Gomez, what happened next? I handed him the watch and he said he liked it. And then he told me he wanted to show his business partner the watch. So we went to the other side of that same building. Did anything strange happen as you were walking to this other section of the building? Well, yes. All of a sudden, I noticed that Mr. Jackson Homer was sweating a lot and he seemed to be very nervous. Did you notice anything that might have caused his nervousness? Well, we went by several people's offices and they stared at us, but that's all. Did any of those people speak to the two of you? Not that I remember, no. Did any of them get up to follow you? No. Did you ever find or converse with Mr. Homer's partner? No. Why not? Probably because of the phone call Mr. Homer got. He answered his phone, listened a little bit, and told me something had come up and he needed to go. Did he end up taking the watch? No, he didn't. He tossed it at me like this, real quick, and walked away. I didn't hear anything more from him, so I sold the watch. Okay, thanks, Mr. Gomez. Nothing further. That is the end of the consecutive section of the exam. We will now continue on with the simultaneous. Please keep your microphones muted. I will connect the audio here in a moment. We'll test again to make sure it's working. Read at the pace of 120. Was the volume okay on that?
Can you put it up louder?
Yeah,
Sure.
bring it up because I could barely hear.
Could barely hear it? Alrighty. Make sure you guys are muted. Okay. You have reached the simultaneous portion of the exam. Okay, good. This is the instructions, so you're not missing. We'll use that to get oriented a little bit. You will hear an opening or closing statement read at the pace of 120 words per minute, which is the same pace I'm speaking now. Interpret everything you hear as you hear it, as completely as you can. If you stop interpreting the exercise before its end, everything from that point forward will be counted wrong. So take this time to adjust your headphones, get comfortable, and take a sip of water if you choose. The exercise will begin in 5 seconds. We've arrived at that point in the trial where both sides will give closing arguments. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and esteemed members of the defense team, thank you for being here with us today as we draw to a close our pursuit of a just disposition in the case now before us. As you well know by now, my name is Cecilia Bernhardt, and I am the prosecutor who carries the burden of proving that on December 8, 2015, defendant Juan Carlos Jimenez knowingly possessed certain weapons not registered to him by this state's government, to wit, a destructive device consisting of a metal pipe, fuse, and gunpowder, all contained within a plastic container found inside the trunk of a green Subaru Forester in North Platte, Nebraska. This in violation of Title 26 Nebraska Criminal Code, Section 58D. I'm also charged with the task of proving to you beyond a reasonable doubt that on December 17th of last year, this same defendant knowingly possessed firearms and ammunition, which he purchased within this state, despite his having been previously convicted of a crime punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year, to wit, a Marlin .22 caliber rifle, serial number XZ1Q. This in violation of Nebraska Revised Statute 81D. Ladies and gentlemen, before I continue, let me just thank you for your conscientious attention up until this point. It has been a long week. We've heard testimony from a variety of sources, and some of it was enough to make our heads spin. But we have come to the end. In just a matter of minutes, you and your companions will retire to the jury room where you will weigh the evidence against Mr. Jimenez, and you will decide whether or not you are convinced that he is guilty of the 2 various serious crimes he's been accused of.
Now, as soon as I finish here, the defense team is going to address you. They will attempt to explain away his actions, claiming that he is a victim of entrapment. They really want you to believe that two longtime members of this state's highly regarded law enforcement team, Officer O'Malley and Officer Jones, went to the trouble of tricking Mr. Jimenez into doing something that in another situation he never would have done. They may admit that our version of events is feasible, yes. They may concede that what we argue, which is that Mr. Jimenez approached an undercover informant for the police and initiated the events that have culminated in this week's trial, is possible. Sure, but they will try to convince you that their version, the notion that Mr. Jimenez was a victim of police trickery, is possible enough that you should find him not guilty. Now, I don't know about you, but that just doesn't jibe with my common sense. It simply doesn't make sense to me that these two police officers, who have plenty of work without inventing cases for themselves, would go to the trouble of enticing Mr. Jimenez into committing a crime that he never would have committed were it not for their intervention. But more importantly, that version simply is not consistent with the facts. Ladies and gentlemen, here are the facts. First, Mr. Juan Carlos Jimenez was convicted of a crime punishable by a term of imprisonment of over a year. We know that is true. In June of 2006, he was sent to prison for 18 months for the crime of second-degree assault. We submitted his criminal record as evidence of that. Second, this defendant possessed a weapon not registered to him by the state's governmental agencies. Said weapon was an explosive device he placed in the back of his former boss's car. You heard testimony from his former boss about a disagreement 3 weeks before he found the device, testimony from a fingerprint expert who described how the defendant's prints were lifted from the device in the car, and testimony from the confidential informant, Alex Uber, who described how Juan Carlos approached him at work and asked him for the materials needed to make a bomb. Third, this defendant purchased and kept in his possession a firearm that was illegal for him to own. You saw the purchase receipt from Riverdale Gun Shop with Mr. Jimenez's signature, viewed the video of him entering the shop empty-handed and leaving the shop with a rifle, and heard testimony from investigating officers to the effect of him admitting to having owned the rifle at the time of his arrest. Now, I am sorry, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, but if there ever was an open and shut case, this is it. The facts don't lie, and they don't leave room for reasonable doubt. Remember, we are not asking you to believe that he is guilty beyond all possibility of a single doubt. We are asking you to use your faculties of reasoning to make a determination in favor of the only sensible verdict here today, and that is a guilty verdict. Thank you.
Okay, did I lose you? If you were like, forget it, I'm done, I quit. Oh, okay, shake it off, stretch it out. That was not easy. We've been at this for almost an hour. Congratulations. And we ended with what was a very difficult simul. Am I right?
Yeah, I have to tell you because there is often not one word for word. By the time I say 2 words for English, 1 word, I am kind of losing the track.
Yes.
I didn't hear clearly, for example, names. Like one name she said very clearly, the other names
Was
were,
muddled.
yeah. So
Is the normal pace that the exam is going, like what she was just saying?
Yes, that is the pace of the
Wow.
normal exam. One thing though, for all of you who do not interpret in Spanish, you will not have Spanish names on your exams. With exercises as we go down, I've been trying to edit out the Spanish only names. You don't have to at least worry about that, but that is about the pace that you'll go.
Wow.
The terminology in that particular simul is very difficult. I don't think the simul terminology wise will be quite as difficult on the day of your test. But the pace, yes, the pace is pretty reflective of what you'll do.
What about consecutive?
So going back to consecutive,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot that you can't interpret from English to Arabic. For instance, when he said an arm and a leg, there is nothing in Arabic that equates that. So are you
Okay.
just supposed to come up with something, or?
Would you say just very expensive?
Yes. Okay. So this exam, well, let me see. Basically, what that particular phrase is an example of an idiomatic phrase. And the reason those are on the exam is twofold. First, they want to make sure you understand it as an interpreter. And second, they want to make sure you're able to put this into something that makes sense for your listener who doesn't know English. So if you, in Arabic, there is nothing to say an arm and a leg, and you say an arm and a leg on the exam because you're trying to interpret every single word, that will be counted wrong because it makes no sense.
Okay.
So when you're dealing with an idiomatic expression, the very most preferable thing is to come up with an equivalent if it exists. And if it does not exist, or even if it exists and you can't think of it, come up with the meaning. So what Marta said about saying very expensive, that's what you would do, and that would count. So what doesn't count is an arm and a leg, literally in your language, unless that is the idiom there too. Or skipping it, that doesn't count. But saying it was really expensive, or it cost, in Spanish, it's an eye out of your head. That's the best equivalent. So if you say that, the words don't match, but the meaning matches, so that works. Make sense?
Yes,
Mhm.
thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. So, and then I think, Marta, was you were asking about the consecutive. You guys finished?
Your
You fin-
pace.
That my pace is about what you will hear on the
Okay.
exam. I may have been reading a little bit slowly. So they may speak a little bit faster, but not a lot faster.
Okay.
And you finished in 21 minutes and like 18 seconds, something like that. So that means that if that's the pace that the person reads, and all of the pauses that we had in there, you have in yours, you will still finish within the time with one repetition. Had we had one more repetition, we would not have been able to fit everything in. Tuan, you made it. I'm glad you could join us.
Okay.
For the exam exercises, you'll want to view the recording because we just went through a simulated exam. We've got about 15 minutes left to talk. And let me see here. I wanted to show you this. And a little bit about where you'll find some of these exercises. And then we'll take this back up on the day of the exam. Okay, so basically this is not the type of test where, let me share this screen with you guys, where you go in and the rater will say, oh, this person is from my region. I like this person passes. Sometimes it feels like it's a very subjective thing, but there's actually a highly objective component to the exam. Whoops. I got feedback from somebody. So Peek, make sure you're on mute. Oh, it's a phone ringing. I thought it was a microphone. Let me see here.
Yes.
Is that you, Tuan?
Yeah, I have to turn it off, the video. I'm sorry.
Okay, let me see if I can turn up your microphone.
Hello?
I can mute you.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody. I'm working on finding. There we go. There we go. Did it. Okay. So, let me increase this. The objective component of the exam is something called a scoring unit. I'll show you these scripts in a moment and you'll see what I'm referring to. But they fall into these categories: grammar, language interference, general vocabulary, legal terminology, idioms and saying, register, numbers and names, words for emphasis and precision, embedded words or phrases, and then slang and colloquialisms. And the numbers break down here. The site translations are 225 words long. 25 of those words are scoring units, words or phrases. The consecutive, the length of that consecutive was accurate. It's between 850 and 950 words long. That's how long that one was. What this exam does not reflect is that the actual certification exam also counts the number of long passages there are, and you know how many of them are coming from Polish. There should be more words that you take from Polish into English, for example. And that's not necessarily weighted all correctly here, but the length and the amount of time it should take you to get through is accurate, as is the number of scoring units. There are 90. And then the final simul is about 120 words a minute. And it is read at it's about 120 words per minute. That's the pace. And it's about, I think, like 800 to 875 words long, something along those lines. And 75 of those words are scoring units. So approximately 10% of the words are scoring units, and they're broken into all these different flavors of words, if you will, so that your raters can get a sense of whether or not you have the flexibility that you need as an interpreter to get all of the huge spectrum of words that we deal with on a daily basis. Okay, so for those of you who have never taken the exam, that's a tiny taste of what it will be like. For those of you who have already taken the exam, this is, again, it's a taste of what it will be like, and it's a chance to look at your performance and see how complete you're being. And then see if you can identify any categories that are particularly troubling for you based on how the scoring units works. There's a concept in education, it's called cognitive load. Basically, it refers to the amount of information your brain is able to process in a given moment. Interpreting requires an intense amount of concentration. And we're using every watt of cognitive load power we have as human beings in our brains and bodies. This exam, this simulation, was a little bit extra stressful because we had the technology component. There's always background noise and stuff going on. It's good to practice in situations like that so that you're training yourself to get used to an environment that's even more difficult than what you'll face on the day of the exam. Hopefully, you'll have a proctor who will have all of the paper ready. Your headphones will be working perfectly. There will be nobody outside drilling holes in the street or filling up potholes or anything like that. And you'll be able to concentrate easily. But in case that's not how it works out, we're practicing now with technology and with lots of people and, and all the stuff we have going on at our respective houses. So hopefully that'll make the day of the exam seem a little less stressful. Like, the stakes will be higher though, so maybe it'll balance out. But all right, that's how the exam works. There are a couple things I noticed just from watching your faces as we were doing this. One is remember to separate consecutive, simul, cite very definitively. I saw some people, when we would get to those longer portions on the consecutive, some of you would jump in and start interpreting simultaneously. Those won't count on the exam. They'll only count the clean recording they have, the recording of you, or it might be that the proctor will stop. If you jump in and start interpreting, they might stop the consecutive audio, and you will waste a little bit of time trying to figure out what's going on. So remember, on consecutive, push yourself to listen to the entire utterance. The longest they get is 50 words. I think on that particular exercise, the one we had a repetition on was around 45. So it's about as long as they get. We'll try to practice with longer portions that are up to 75, sometimes even 100 words long. Again, just in practice. But on the exam, it's not that bad.
But don't they usually ask the person, the speaker, to pause, as to my experience, to pause every 2-3 sentences, and it's rarely the utterance is that long.
Exactly. And so in the real world, you have a lot more control over how much a person talks before you stop them and interpret. The reason the exam is written the way it is because they've learned that, unfortunately, if there's a witness on a witness stand and the interpreter interrupts very often after just a few words, the jury, for some reason, perceives that witness as less credible. So unwittingly, the interpreter is influencing the jury's impression of that witness. So the test writers want us to have a minimum level of proficiency where in a 20-minute testimony, we can a couple of times handle things up to 50 words long. But yes, you're right. In the real world, it's not that long. You can...
Yeah. Even in a court, a judge usually asks the opponent, whoever, the attorneys have tendency to go into longer utterance, but then usually they're reminded by judge. That's in real life. But
yes. In real life, that's fortunate. And on the exam, 50 words max, and we'll work hard to get there. To that. And then the other thing with the simultaneous is that was a very challenging topic. So there was destructive device, there was an exploding metal tube, there was a trunk, there was a gun shop, and there was a firearm, and there was a lot of very specific vocabulary in that. What I've heard, what I've learned from other trainers is that the exam can vary in that if you get 2 really difficult sight translation exercises, for example, it's possible that your simultaneous will be a little bit easier. If you get a really challenging consecutive, maybe your sight translations will be a little bit easier. They try to balance out the challenge across the exam. So that one was probably extra hard, which makes it a really good thing to practice with. So that by the time you get to the exam, you're like, that's it? That's what you're asking me to do? But it is reflective of the pace and how sometimes you can get behind and then just feel like, okay, I'm done. Know that when you test in the testing environment on the simultaneous portion, if you stop interpreting, your proctor will say, they'll encourage you to continue interpreting. Please continue interpreting till the end of the exercise. And if you say, no, there's no way I can continue this exercise, they'll stop. And then, of course, you've missed all those scoring units from that point on. So while we're together in this environment and you work through exercises every week, I challenge you to, excuse me, to train yourself to push through to the very end of the exercise, even if you find yourself getting behind. Okay, so let's imagine on that particular sight translation, you can see Canvas on your screen now, right? Yes, okay. So, oh yes. I'll show you where you'll find these exercises in a moment. But let's imagine we're moving on to week 3. For us, simultaneous is the real bear. It's the one we've managed to pass all the other sections, but simultaneous is just very elusive. If that is you, I encourage you, this is week 3, for example, you'll see there's a couple of technique exercises. The first 2 are shadowing exercises. You may have heard of this already. What is meant by shadowing exercise is that you listen to this audio and you repeat everything you hear. These are both in English. So you're going to be sitting at your table, and anyone sitting at your table with you is going to hear an exact repetition of the words in English, all right, on both exercises. This is where you start. If you find yourself really struggling to get from the beginning to an end of a simultaneous, take out the factor where you're switching the language into your working language and only work with the language you're hearing it in. And record yourself and notice what's getting in your way. Think about your pronunciation. Because by doing shadowing, where you repeat what you hear in the same language as you hear it, you're teaching your brain the very beginning step of thinking and listening and understanding and talking and continuing to listen all at the same time. Okay? Sorry about that phone. Okay? So if you're asking yourself, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to get this simultaneous thing down? The first step is to work really hard on the technique exercises, the shadowing. All right? And we'll continue working on all of that over our next 8 weeks together. Now,
but it looks like it's a lot for week 3.
There is a lot in here for week 3. This is videos. These are optional lecture content. The important stuff is the practice. And that's under here. So there's 2 practice technique exercises for arraignments, and then there's a sight translation, a consecutive, and a simul. Those are the most important. If you want to brush up on what an arraignment even is, then look at this lecture. If you want to hear my philosophy on how we can best practice, read this. But the most important stuff is actually doing the work, which is that. Okay? So, you've been through the simulated test. Now the question is, what do you do from here?
Yes.
Sorry?
Can we repeat them at home? Can we practice those, what we just did?
Yes. So I would encourage you, with the money that you guys paid to enroll in the course, you've basically bought yourself 8 weeks worth of material, and those include 3 practice tests. Each practice test would go for about $50 to $70 if you were to buy them individually. And like the whole, so anyway, there's good value in those. All of these exercises are downloadable. You will have access to this material. Let me see what it said in here, just a second. Until August 2nd, it'll be in this particular format. On August 2nd, I archive the class, meaning that I save all of this. and if you log on, you won't be able to see it anymore. But that doesn't mean you don't have a right to have the material. You're welcome, and I encourage you to download it as we go and to come back to it again and again and again and again. Especially the practice tests, because they are so hard and there's such a diverse amount of vocabulary. So this is week 2, all right? We'll meet again on Thursday. We'll probably go through we'll talk in more depth about these exercises. Some of you can interpret for us. Even though we won't know your language per se, we'll still be able to talk about terminology, and the act of interpreting for the whole group is very good for you. This stuff, review basic information about interpreting. This is under week 2. That's, again, optional lectures. You're welcome to look at it. But the important parts are critiquing your pretest performance and perfecting your pretest performance. All right? So to do this, to critique it, you're going to need your recording that you made. And again, I'll show you exactly where it's at. You're going to come in here. You're going to click on modules. You'll go down to week 2. Click on the phrase critique your pretest performance. And this is where you'll see scripts. All right. We did the language neutral stuff. So look at the language neutral stuff. You'll click on it, and it'll download the practice test that we were looking at today with the script. And here's this. So this is the first sight translation. Here's the second sight translation. And this is the sight translation with the scoring units on it, the things that counted as points. So when I say critique your pretest performance, I'm saying play your recording if you have one. And listen, did you say 4:15 a.m.? Did you say officers? Did you say South Precinct, complaint, blah, blah, blah? If you did, what did you say for those? Most people fail because they omit too much. So if you said something, it may have been right. You're miles closer to getting points if you say something than you are if you don't say anything at all. So then you'll go through here. Here's the consecutive, again, with the underlined phrases that count for something. Now you'll see 1D, 2D, 3H, 4G, 5B, or whatever it is. What does that mean? Okay, this is the script of the test, what's on the screen right now. If you go back to Canvas, you can see the instruction, track your score with the answer key. So again, for language neutral, you can download, you click on it, it'll download it, and you'll see the answer key. And this is where the category is decoded for you. So 4:15 a.m., names and numbers. So the G behind number 1 on the sight translation meant names and numbers. Then if you download it in Microsoft Excel, you can add in points for each one you get right. You just put 1 instead of 0, and it'll automatically figure your score for you. It may prompt you to download it in Google Docs, and that capability then is lost. It won't figure your score automatically, okay? So.
I am not sure I understand you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't use the Microsoft Excel, how do you know your score?
You'll have to count it up yourself.
So
You'll
each
just have to
grade
add it
will
up.
have the number, right?
Each one of these is worth 1 point. So you'll just tally, okay, I said female right, I said God damn it right, I said a jar right, I said enter, that's 5, and I got all the other ones wrong. 5 out of 25 means I got a, whatever it is, 0.5%. But if you have Excel, it'll add it up for you is all. Yes.
I do, but I don't use it, so it doesn't matter.
Well, it'll still do it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So to find this, again, this is in Canvas where you're most of you are accepted and in. Week 2, critique your performance. Okay? You find the scripts here so you can listen to yourself and read along with what you were supposed to have said. And then just to tally up your scores, you find the answer key there. Okay? Now, this prompt tells you to comment on it, so you could hit reply and tell me about how that went. Would you have passed? What was the most difficult? What did you do well? And all that stuff. Now, what if you want to review this exam, like Marta said? What if you want to retake it? What if you want to take this over and over again every day for the rest of your life? To find that information, you click on Perfect Your Pretest Performance, okay? And that's where you see everything. Spanish version, language neutral version, sight translation, consecutive audio, simultaneous audio. Okay? So guys, to re-access this exam, you go where? To your email? No, you go to Canvas, modules, and the last 2 assignments of week 2. Okay?
Okay.
A question.
Yes.
So, do we need to turn anything? Oh, it's like says April 14. It's a deadline. That's what I'm having problems
What
with.
time on Thursday?
Thursday we meet over the lunch hour at noon for anybody who's able to get there.
If
Now,
can I replay it?
yes, I record all of them. So if you can't be there,
Okay.
you'll be able to participate by listening to the recording. Where do you find that?
Yeah.
You find it under your to-do list. All of these links are the same after week 2. So, but it's just easier to remember, okay, we're on week 4, I'm going to week 4. Here's the Monday link. Here's the Thursday link, okay? You'll find them in Canvas. If you ever have a doubt, you email me, call me, or text me, and I'll help you. But Thursdays, here's the link right here. It's also in that email I sent you, Happy Weekend. So you can find that. It should be in there.
But recording is somewhere down below that page. Is that correct?
Yes. The recording, again, you go back to modules, all the way down to the very bottom. Recordings, office hours, click here to view. So for example, last week, this was the video. And if you drive around a lot and you don't want to use up your cell phone data, you can access just the audio. So that, depending on what we're doing, that might be great and it might be awful. Because if you needed the screen to understand what we're doing, then that won't work. But if it's up to you, it's there as an option.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. So Thursday, we'll talk more about the scoring units themselves. How did you say 415? What do I do with the phrase, God damn it? What do I do if we don't say raining cats and dogs in my language? All that stuff. And then over the weekend, try to get some time in on that arraignment stuff for week 3. Because in week 3 in class, we'll start working on some of the shadowing, sight translation, consecutive simul stuff for a week from today. Okay?
Perfect.
All right. Mwah. I'd give you all high fives if I could,
Bye.
because that is exhausting. I'm proud of you for getting through it. We'll talk
Thank
it
you.
out more. All right.
Thank you. See you Thursday.
Sounds great. I'll see you soon.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night, Kelly. I'll try to be there on Thursday, even if it's half.
Yeah, I may
If
not
it's half
be able to.
even if it's just half, because I'm not
Perfect.
sure, but I'll
And
try.
I'll
try
be there.
too.
Even, you know what, even if nobody comes, I'll still just like start a PowerPoint or something until people show up halfway through. So I'll be there, okay?
Okay.
All right, everybody.
Bye.
Nighty night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.